And from Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War,
Right.
written in 2008, you write, had Britain never given the war guarantee to Poland, the Soviet Union would almost surely have borne the brunt of this blow that fell on France. The Red Army, ravaged by Stalin's purge of senior officers, might have collapsed. Bolshevism might have been crushed. Communism might have perished in 1940 instead of living on for 50 years.
I think the greatest mistake in British diplomacy and in the history of the British Empire and British nation was the war guarantee it gave to Poland. It was not Munich. Look, Great Britain couldn't go to war to keep the Sudetenland, which is 90% German, keep these unhappy Germans who had been put under Czech rule by the people of Versailles, including Wilson, against their will, against the principle of self-determination, and against the terms under which the Germans had signed basically an armistice. They put these Germans under there, and you knew the Germans under there in the Sudetenland wanted to go to Berlin, be it all the Austrians and the others. And what happened was you couldn't go to war for them. Now, what Chamberlain's mistake was not in not going to war, that was the right decision, but it was in coming home and saying, Hitler, I really understand this guy. I mean, he trusts me, we work together, we've cut this deal, it is peace for our time. Instead of coming home and saying, look, there's no way we can fight for the Sudetenland, but we better prepare ourselves because this guy is a liar and you can't trust him. And so instead of that, Chamberlain got himself all worked up that he was a miracle worker with Hitler. But what happened in 1938 or 39 March, Czechoslovakia came apart as you could predict it was going to come apart. At the end of World War I, they put 3.25 million Germans under the Czechs. You put 2.5 million Slovaks. You put 500,000 Ruthenian Ukrainians. You put 800,000 Hungarians. And you put 150,000 Poles. And that was half the country, and the other half is Czechs. Now, you think this thing's going to stay together? I mean, anybody knows anything about ethno-national, it was going to come apart. At Munich, Hitler told Chamberlain, when we get to Sudetenland, I can tell you, the Poles are going to want their share, and the Hungarians are going to want their share. The Hungarians took a slice in November of 1938 out of it. The Poles grabbed a slice. So it comes to March, and the Slovaks say, we want to be independent, and the Ruthenians want to be independent. So the Slovaks say that the Czechs send in the army and they crush the parliament. So Monsignor Tiso, he runs to Hitler and says, help us, save us. And Hitler says, okay, if you break free, declare independence, we'll make you a protectorate and you'll get your independence. And so the Czechs come and they say, well, Slovaks are gone. And Hoxha goes to Berlin and he tells Hitler, give us the same deal basically as you gave the Slovaks. And Hitler said, no, we'll make you a protectorate, but you're going to lose your independence. Hitler had a real animus against the Czechs. So this whole thing comes apart, and it's a mess. It should never have been put together. But the idea that this means Hitler's going to conquer the world is preposterous. So what do the Brits do? Chamberlain sees it breaking apart. He says, makes his first speech. He says, well, our guarantee of the Czechs is finished because the country's fallen apart. So the foreign minister, I'll think of his name in a second. The foreign minister comes to him, and he says that, no, this isn't good enough. And he pushes Chamberlain, pushes him, and then Hitler gets memo back from Lithuania, who had stolen it from the Germans in 1923. And he's talking to the Poles, and he says, we want Danzig back. You can hold on to the corridor, we want Danzig. In other words, Hitler wants to bring the Germans back in. And so instead of handling this as realizing that they can't affect policy in the area of Eastern Europe, Neville Chamberlain, unsolicited, gives a Polish dictator, Colonel Beck, he gives him an unsolicited war guarantee. In other words, if it comes to a conflict between you and the Germans over Danzig and the Polish corridor, Great Britain and the British Empire will go to war against Germany. It was an act, they'd never fought in that part of Europe before. They put the entire British Empire, they gave Polish colonels the power to bring the British Empire into war against Hitler's Germany. Hitler did not want war with Britain. Hitler was an admirer of the British. He didn't want anything, in my judgment, west of the Rhine River. If any ambitions he had were in the East, and frankly, even the Soviet Union. If you had not given the war guarantee to Poland, and let's say Poland cut the deal and gave Danzig, a little town, back to Germany, how could Hitler have invaded Russia? He didn't have a border with the Soviet Union. He had Poland in the east, he had an ally in Hungary, he had an ally in Slovakia, he would have had an ally in Poland, he had an ally in Italy, an ally in Spain, an ally in Portugal. In other words, he's surrounded by friendly countries. So I think there might not have been a World War II.
Well, you do write in Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War one short sentence that World War II was a just war.
Oh, there's no doubt it was just. Was it necessary? No, I don't believe it was necessary. It came, that's Hitler's, I mean, excuse me, not Hitler's. The phrase, the unnecessary war, is Winston Churchill's. He came to Washington, D.C. in December 1941 after Pearl Harbor. And FDR says, what should we call this war? And Churchill says, why don't we call it the unnecessary war? Because there never was a war that was more easily prevented than the one we're in right now. And my view is the fatal mistake was what the British given the war guarantee to Poland. People say, what should they have done, Pat, after Czechoslovakia? What should they have done? Very simple. They should have formed a solemn alliance with France, sent troops to France, drawn a line in front of Belgium and France, and defended the Channel ports, defended the British Empire, defended France, and told Hitler, if you cross that line, you are at war with Britain and France. Then, still being neutral, they could have bought all the planes and anything they wanted from the United States. Hitler would never have come west, in my judgment. He didn't want to come west. When he did come west, he conquered France and went back home. He didn't ask for the French colonies. He didn't ask for the French fleet. He didn't ask for bases in Syria. He didn't want war with Britain and France. He never wanted a two-front war. I'm not even sure he wanted war with the Soviet Union because he had pretty much gotten, I mean, all his neighbors were friends and allies. Now, was that a controversial book? You bet.